Since graduating from Stanford University's journalism school 10 years ago, I've worked on documentaries for Hulu, HBO, The Washington Post, New York Times, and National Geographic. Here are 11 documentary filmmaking lessons that I learned after finishing grad school. So these are 11 lessons learned from working full-time as a video journalist and documentarian that I wished I had learned earlier. Lesson 1, you don't always have to lead. Being an assistant can dramatically accelerate your learning curve. My first job out of journalism school was as a video journalist, an intern at the LA Times. And when I got to the LA Times, I felt like I needed to prove myself to everyone there. I needed to show how valuable I could be. I needed to show how ambitious I was as a journalist and a documentarian. And what that meant was I took pride in doing every story alone. I wanted to find the story, I wanted to go out and shoot the story, I wanted to edit the story. I don't need help. I don't need anyone's help. At least that's what I thought. And that summer I did get a lot of valuable reps, but I don't think that I learned at the speed which was possible early in my career. And I got to see the other side of this after I left the LA Times. And one of my foundational experiences as a journalist was I got to do a fellowship with New York Times columnist and Pulitzer Prize winner, Nicholas Kristof. He and I traveled to Baltimore, India, and Nepal. And on this trip, instead of feeling like I needed to prove myself, instead of feeling like I needed to showcase to him how good I could or would be as a journalist, I decided, you know what? This is such a unique opportunity to be reporting with someone like this. I'm gonna just sit back. I'm gonna sit back more and learn. I'm gonna ask questions. I am gonna worry less about the stories that I'm doing and how impressive those seem, and just be a sponge learning from someone who has so much more experience than I do. And what happened is in this 2-week reporting fellowship that I did with Nicholas Kristof around the world, I learned more in those 2 weeks than I did in a year of grad school. I learned more in those 2 weeks than I did in these 6 months of working as a video journalist intern at the LA Times. And that's because I humbled myself. I asked questions, I asked for help. I asked when I didn't know why someone was doing something or how could I do something better, and became more of an assistant, someone in the background rather than the person stepping forward and leading. And that was a big lesson for me because I think I come from a background of someone who's like, show how dedicated you are by stepping forward and leading and being the front person. And I realized that's not always. I got into the documentary filmmaking career, taking opportunities when I find cinematographers or directors who clearly have better skills than I do, and asking if I can assist them, asking if I can be a camera assistant or a production assistant, humbling myself and maybe taking a role that is not up to what I typically do, just as an opportunity to learn from someone who has valuable information to share. Lesson 2, the easiest path is likely not the most valuable path. Now, I want to talk about this one on both a micro and a macro level. On a micro level, when we think about documenting stories, creating films, one of the lessons that I learned from the aforementioned Nicholas Kristof was we were reporting in Baltimore in 2015 on the opioid crisis in the United States. And the Baltimore Public Health Department set up our whole reporting trip. They had us visiting methadone treatment clinics. They had us talking to people who had been in treatment and now were now out of treatment and had overcome addiction. And we had all this easy access lined up. And I thought, great, this is gonna make for the great backbone of a story. And then at the end of our reporting trip, we were driving back from one of these treatment clinics, and Nicholas Kristof, he told our driver to stop the car, and he leaned over to me and he said, you know, we're talking on this whole trip to people who are seeking services that can help them overcome their addiction. We're going to these treatment clinics, but what about the people who we haven't heard from, who are not seeking treatment for one reason or another? Maybe they don't have the resources. Maybe they don't know that these treatment clinics are out there. And so we pulled off the side of the road, and Nicholas Kristof literally just walked towards this homeless encampment that was underneath a freeway. And I was really uncomfortable in this moment, but I, again, being the assistant, soaking up the wisdom, followed him, and we got to this homeless encampment, and Nick started talking to a few of these people, and then one of those people who came up and talked to us became the cornerstone character for a op-ed column that came out in the New York Times. What this showed to me in that moment was we had all this easy access, but someone who was working at the top of the game, like Nicholas Kristof, sought that voice that was a little more uncomfortable to get. He had to go that little bit of an extra mile to talk to someone who it wasn't always the easiest to talk to get the other side of the story. And in journalism school, we always talk about trying to seek out different perspectives, different points of view, but getting to see it up close and personal as I was assisting and being mentored by Nicholas Kristof really taught me about the value of what that looks like. Now, on a macro level, when it comes to career, the easiest path is not the most valuable path. I say this to all those people who are watching right now who want to become video journalists or documentarians, because this career is hard. It's hard to get work. It's hard to get paid to do meaningful documentary work. And if you have skills with a camera, you're going to be approached by so many different opportunities, because everyone needs a camera, to do, corporate work, commercial work all the time. And I'll come to later in this list when that's valuable. But the easiest jobs aren't always the most valuable to us in our heart and what's going to fulfill us in the long term in our careers. And so I just want to urge you all, because it's been a lesson for me, that sometimes you have to say no to those easy jobs to leave space for the ones that are going to fulfill you the most. Lesson number 3, documentary filmmakers are entrepreneurs first and artists second. The overwhelming majority of documentarians are freelancers. They're business owners, they're entrepreneurs. And I didn't realize this when I was getting started in this industry. I didn't realize that part of being a documentary filmmaker means that you're running a business. You need to set up an LLC. You need to figure out how to file estimated taxes, how to do your bookkeeping, how to pay invoices, how to hire contractors, how to market your business. All of these business skills are what then give us the freedom to do the artistic work that we love so much. And this was a hard lesson for me to learn, because for a long time, I didn't consider myself a businessman. I didn't consider myself to be someone who was great with business operations. I considered myself an artist. I wanted to focus on the making of stories, and then all the business stuff, it kind of felt like a distraction. It felt like it limited me from the creative arts that I love so much. But over the past 10 years, I'm not saying I'm an expert in all this stuff at all, but I've just gotten a little bit better each and every year. I've started to put a little bit more focus on my business operations each and every year. And what I've found is that the more disciplined I get as a business owner and with business operations, actually the more freedom it allows me as a creator. Lesson number 4, commercial work and documentary work can be in a symbiotic relationship if you let it. Now, this lesson is kind of balanced with the one I talked about earlier when I was saying that you do need to say no to some of the easiest jobs that will come your way, keeping space for the soul-fulfilling documentary and artistic work that you want to do. At the same time, now again, we're finding that middle ground for each of us, the balance for each of us. Commercial and corporate work is very important for all documentarians. Now, when I was getting started in this career, I felt like if I was taking on commercial or client work and not making a documentary, I was selling out, that I was failing. Because the filmmakers who I saw, who I looked up to, they never talked about their commercial and client work. All they talked about was their soul fulfilling. And it would be amazing if we could all work on that all the time, but that's not really how the economics of this industry play out. So what I had to learn was that there is absolutely no shame in taking on commercial and corporate work as a way to supplement your documentary work. And when I talk about letting these have a symbiotic relationship with each other. Also, what I mean is coming into commercial and client projects with the mindset that the skills I'm learning doing this commercial work is going to be extremely relevant to the work that you are doing as a documentarian. For me, my kind of trade skill, if you will, is as a cinematographer. Well, if I'm setting up an interview for the New York Stock Exchange, that is a directly applicable skill to when I am working on a documentary that I'm super passionate about animal rights. And so when I'm in those commercial environments, even if it's not the project that I'm the most passionate about, what I've learned over the past 10 years is to find the moments where I am just developing my skills step by step and continue to remember that this is connected to the types of documentary filmmaking that I want to do. It's all skills that are directly relevant to each other. So I just need to embrace the symbiotic relationship between the two, commercial and documentary. Lesson 5, sometimes you need to let go of outcomes. Not every project is a reflection of you and your artistry. This is a lesson that I learned a number of years ago from a frequent collaborator of mine named Seamus Hart, and it's really helped me so much. We were working on a client project where we were working with a client that had a ton of stakeholders who were going to be making a lot of asks on me as I was working on the edit of kind of like a branded documentary that we were working for a company. I remember Seamus coming to me in those early rounds of edits, and he told me that going into projects for my career, for my mental health sanity, I needed to do a better job when it came to figuring out what projects am I gonna put like my heart and soul into, and which projects are client services and I'm just delivering something that's going to make the client happy, and I don't need to put my whole being on the line fighting for every creative decision and feeling like whatever I make is gonna be like this portfolio piece that's going to be on my tombstone and going to represent who I am and my artistic vision. And it was such an important message to hear at the time, because I feel like at that moment, everything I made, I put a lot of pressure on that it needed to be perfect. And I felt like if I made anything that didn't perfectly represent me, it felt so grinding. It felt so messy, and it didn't make me feel good at all. And Seamus telling me that I need to delineate which projects are which was so helpful, and it's helped me go into client services projects and just be open to hear their feedback and say, hey, what do you want me to do? You tell me. Great, I'm gonna make it happen. And just find out what are the moments that I'm just serving someone else's vision, and when am I taking on projects that I'm willing to fight for, where I'm willing to just serve my artistic vision. And to delineate those, that has been really helpful for my career and my mental sanity. Lesson number 6, be brave enough to be terrible. Now, if you're early on in your career as a documentarian, my guess is that you are at this place which we refer to as the creative gap. I first heard this from the legendary storyteller Ira Glass, but the creative gap is that gap between your taste, your artistic taste, the types of documentaries you aspire to make, the types of documentaries that you like, and your skill set, your current skills. And there is a gap there. And closing that gap is hard, and it's painful, and it's embarrassing, and most people stop before they get their skills at the level of their taste because it's just too painful. My encouragement to you is, as you are on your journey, as you are making your way across that creative gap, be brave enough to be terrible. You're gonna be bad. You're gonna be terrible. I feel bad and terrible at so many things, but we need to be brave enough to face that and be brave enough to get through it and get to the other side. Because when we get to the other side, we are not only going to be stronger storytellers, we are going to be stronger people, and we're gonna actually have a chance to make this very difficult industry, this very difficult and unconventional career path into a career, because we've gone through that. And if we're so terrified at every moment that what we make is not going to be perfect, we're never going to take enough chances. We're never going to take enough shots to actually do something that leads to that opportunity, that leads to us getting lucky and setting us on our career path down the road. Number 7, hold admiration loosely. Many of the people you look up to live a life that would make you miserable. So back in 2018, when I got into the National Geographic ecosystem of freelancers and I started going to the National Geographic Storyteller Summit, I was going to these events and seeing the greats of the industry, the top documentary filmmakers, the top documentary cinematographers and photographers, all in these one spaces. And I was like, oh my God, if I could just be like them, if I could just go on expeditions like them. And then I started to get close enough to those people and hear the behind the scenes stories of their life that made me step back a little bit. Because while I looked at their Instagrams and saw their screenings in theaters of their epic travels to Yosemite and the Arctic and climbing mountains and descending into the ocean, I didn't see that they had strained marriages, often leading to divorce. I didn't see that they weren't around their family, their kids, that they didn't have close relationships at home with community. They were on the road, 250 days a year. And I started to be like, I would hate that. I would be absolutely miserable if that was my life. I love being here in Berkeley, California. I love being home. I love being with my girlfriend. I love having friends and building community locally. I don't like traveling all the time. And that's when I realized that I need to hold my admiration for the people I look up to loosely. And I need to admire them in targeted ways. I can admire someone's passion for this art form. I can admire the way that they tell a story. But I shouldn't just hold someone up on a pedestal and say, I want to be like that person. Because I have no idea what that person's going through. And more than likely, the thing that allowed them to tell a story I admire is because they live a life that I would hate. And so I need to create my own path. So realizing that I need to hold these admirations loosely has been really helpful as I try to design the career and life that's going to give me the most longevity in this career. Lesson 8, what makes you weird is your competitive advantage. So when I finished grad school and I was looking at the journalists I wanted to be like, when I was looking at the documentarians I wanted to be like, again, it was looking at their model and trying to model it exactly. And what that meant was me, and those things are the things that make me weird. And the longer I've gone in this opportunities to work with brands like the North Face. Why did I get to do a photography campaign with the North Face? Why did I get to film a short documentary for the North Face? Well, it's because one of the things that makes me weird is I am an ultra runner. I spend 10 to 14 hours running on the trails every single week. I run about 70 to 80 miles a week. That's how I want to spend my time. And the fact that I love endurance athletics and I want to spend my time doing that means that when the North Face wants to make a documentary where they're following an ultra marathon athlete that they sponsor, who can they call that's going to be able to not only film that story, but at least for some period of time, keep up with that athlete on foot who they want to document, who's going to understand what the sport of ultra running is all about and be able to tell that story kind of from the inside. That's me. And that's why I got the call. Similarly, I've been doing a lot of work this year on animal rights stories. And one of the things that makes me weird, at least from a population percentage standpoint, is that I'm vegan. I care a lot about animal rights, specifically farmed animal rights. So I've been getting calls from media organizations when they are doing stories about animal rights. Organizations like Compassion World Farming, We Animals, and that has given me an opportunity to lean into something that I'm uniquely passionate about and uniquely able to tell. And so these days, I try to embrace everything that makes me unique, everything that makes me weird, and be loud about that and share it here on the channel, share it on my other social media platforms, because the things that make us who we are going to be what we enjoy doing the most and give us a competitive advantage. That is when we are going to see our careers go whew. Lesson number 9, changing your mind is a strength. I've always been the type of person who, when I said I was gonna do something, I stick to it. When I'm setting a goal or say I'm gonna accomplish something, I'll do everything I can to stick to that, and that's a point of pride. I don't take that loosely. I take my commitments, I'm holding myself accountable to that all the time. But I realize if I'm too strong-headed about sticking to everything I say, even when the data that I'm getting in real time, the feelings I have, the context changing, tells me I should change my mind, I'll ignore it. I'll ignore it. And over the past 10 years, I've learned that I really need to embrace changing my mind, not as a weakness, but as a strength. And this revealed itself most presently when in 2021, I said I was gonna move to New York City because that is the hub of nonfiction filmmaking, and I was gonna live there indefinitely. Well, I moved out to New York City in 2021, and I hated it. I hated living in New York City. It was not the right fit. And I think earlier Austin, maybe back right when I was finishing grad school, would have said, hey, you committed to being in New York, you're gonna give it a couple of years, at least. You committed to moving here, do what it takes to be a New Yorker. But 2021 Austin had learned this lesson, that it's okay to change your mind. And I gave it 6 months. I said, I'm out of here. And moving back to California was the best decision that I have ever made. Things change, context evolves, and it's okay for you to change and you to change your mind. That is not a weakness, it's a superpower. Adaptability, humility is a superpower. Number 10, be ambitious with your job, in parentheses project, not with your career. This is a little counterintuitive one, maybe based on what I was just talking about, but I've always been someone who was really long-term focused on my goals when it came to my career. I spent so much time talking about like, oh, I wanna win an Oscar for best documentary, or I wanna be having this level of freedom later on in my career when it comes to choosing my projects. And I put a lot of like mental thought into those long-term goals. And when you do that, I believe that every project you're working on right now just becomes a stepping stone to the future. And if you don't reach that future goal, well then, weren't all the stepping stones along the way just leading to a disappointment? Where I've started to evolve my mindset is I want to have those long-term goals, but again, kind of hold them loosely. Just have them in the background there, work my way back to how can I get there and focus on those stepping stones more as an end in itself, not a means to an end. So what that means is I try to bring the mindset to every project that I'm doing now, whether it's a 90-second vertical video for social media, or one of these YouTube videos, or a documentary project that I'm hired on as a DP. I try to take the mindset that what I'm working on right now is the most important thing. It's the most important thing. I have to treat it like that. Now, it might not end up being the most important thing, and it more than likely won't end up being the best thing that I do. But if I take it seriously, if I try my best at it, if I make it the most important thing, then over time, what I'm doing is going to turn into a career. Because I will be intentional and hardworking and care enough every single day that when I stack those days on top of each other, we're actually gonna create something amazing in the future. And the final lesson today, lesson 11, remember that you once dreamed of being where you are now. For me, there was a time when I absolutely dreamed about being a full-time filmmaker. When I dreamed of, owning the type of gear that I have sitting over there in the shelves. And sometimes it's easy to forget that where you are now, at one point you dreamed of being there and you thought, oh, that's gonna make me happy. And I think that's a really valuable perspective to continue to have, no matter where you are in your career journey, is to remember how far you've come and to take pride and find fulfillment in that. If you can't find joy where you are in your career right now, whether you are hustling as a production assistant or you're just making wedding videos or you are just peeking around YouTube here, trying to figure out if you want to go all in on doing this as your career path. If you can't find joy in this part now, you're not going to find joy and not going to be fulfilled when you get to wherever you're going. Practice having gratitude for where you are right now. Find joy in the process, in the climb, in the journey. And if you do that, if you make that a habit, I guarantee that whenever you get to where you aspire to be going, you'll be happy there. We're into year 2 here on the channel since I started posting weekly educational content on filmmaking, and I want to give you the most value that I can. So please drop a comment with what you want to learn, see, or who you want to hear from this year. Go out and tell some stories.